Welcome to another episode of Blueprint Wellness. I'm Troy Green, accompanied by Dr. Scott Knepper, and today we wanted to take a deep dive into gut health. We're going to talk about three things today.
Gut health, why it matters, what can go wrong, and what you can do about it.
Yeah, so we've been hearing a lot lately, on social media, as well as we see it in the clinic all the time. Patients come in, they've been to multiple specialists, they've undergone colonoscopies, they've been told to take Metamucil, up their fiber intake, XYZ. They're not seeing any results, waking up bloated every day. We see a lot of motility issues, whether or not it's, constipation, diarrhea, and they just feel miserable. And so I know today we really wanted to take a deep dive into why this might be happening, how we can diagnose this, and what we can do about it. And I know we wanted to talk some more about that. So can you help us dive into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the symptoms that you talked about are so unfortunate. And we see that it's such a common, unfortunately, a common place for a patient to be, where they're having either mood issues, they're having issues with their immune system, they're having stress responses, right? And what we know now, what the literature and the science shows us, is that it's related to gut health, right? Mm-hmm. We know that the gut is so important in neural states, in mood states, in your body's response to stress and your hormones, right? And so all of these things are going to impact how you feel on a daily basis. And therefore, your gut health is so important in helping to optimize and regulate how those different systems are functioning, and then ultimately how the patients are going to feel. So absolutely.
I definitely want to touch on the mood perspective. We get a lot of this. We have people coming in as well. We've seen them bring their kids in. They're saying, I don't know what's going on. They're depressed. They've got anxiety. There's no reason for this, and we know that serotonin is basically a large amount of serotonin is regulated in the bowel. And so
who'd have thought, right?
Yeah, who would have thought, right? Yeah. But it kind of makes sense, Thinking back, there's been times when you're nervous, for example, for a job interview, you get those butterflies in your stomach, sometimes you got to run to the bathroom, and the same goes now that we know when you're eating, for example, a lot of processed foods, this can slow motility, diabetes can slow motility, and thus in turn can affect our mental status, which is very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We never want the gut to be stagnant, right? We want pro-motility, we want movement. Think of like a river, right? Your gut is a river. If a river is staying still, it's a bad environment, right? Now you're gonna have overgrowth, you're gonna have dysbiosis, which we're gonna explain what that is, right? In fact, Troy, why don't you go ahead and tell them, what does dysbiosis of the gut mean?
Absolutely, yeah, we hear this word getting thrown around again all the time. What does it mean? Obviously, it's disruption of the gut biome. Now, what is the biome, right? That's the bacteria, the good bacteria in our stomach that helps break down waste, keep our motility going, keep us pooping, essentially, right? Everybody poops, right? I know myself, if I don't go to the restroom, I'm not having a good day. That's very important. We got to make sure that we're keeping our bowels regular. That keeps our mood good. It keeps us feeling great.
And it's like a fingerprint too, right? I mean, your gut biome, the flora, meaning the plant, the bacterial life that kind of make up your gut lining, that are the ones that are occupying that space. It's very unique, right? That diversity, the makeup of the different types of species that exist in our gut, as well as the concentrations of those species, whether we're favoring one or the other. That is essentially our gut biome fingerprint, and it's different from one person to another.
Yeah, well, we also know that it can be affected, right? It's not that we go through life with the same bacteria and they last 75 years. We're constantly changing. Obviously, this is affected by lifestyle, as we call it, meaning, hey, if you consume alcohol all the time, if you're eating processed foods all the time, if you're doing stuff that's going to damage your good bacteria, well, I guess what? You're going to have a bad outcome.
I heard a great quote recently. It just reminds me, just jumping back to that river analogy, right? And you touched on it, saying, it's not the same at all times. It's that the same man never steps in the same river twice, right? Because the second time it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Same thing with your gut, right? And so your gut's not going to stay the same. What you're feeding it, your response to your environment, the toxins that are going through your body, how your health is at the time, is going to affect how your gut is. How permeable, meaning is there openings in your gut? How leaky it is,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That permeability is affected. Your inflammatory states, your stress responses, what your hormones are doing at the time. Not only your stress hormones, but even your endogenous androgenic hormones, meaning your sex-related hormones.
Yes.
Those are also going to be impacted by, again, how your gut is. And so the health of your gut is going to have a tremendous impact on you. At the same time, you can affect the makeup of your gut that then has a positive feedback as well.
Yeah,
Right?
and speaking, obviously, I heard you touch on leaky gut there. We've heard this a lot. I have patients come in, they're like, I think I have leaky gut, or we've heard a lot on the parasite movement, right? Everyone's got parasites. We all, that's the reason I'm bloated. It's not because I went to the bars the last 3 nights.
Yeah.
It's the parasites, and so.
And it's true, everyone does have parasites,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, everyone has bacteria.
But I wanted to touch on 3 things, right? We do have these patients, like I'd mentioned before, that have undergone multiple colonoscopies. They've tried everything. Their GI doctors told them high fiber, Metamucil, X, Y, Z, but they continue to have these symptoms. And I've seen a lot of people, honestly, and it's really sad, almost give up. It's like, well, I guess this is my life. They're depressed. And it's miserable. No one likes being bloated.
Right.
But the big question is, do you have one of these big 3, as I like to call them? We've got leaky gut, we've got SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then we've got, obviously, the parasites. Now, what's difficult, and I know you know a lot about this as well, is all their symptoms kind of intertwine, right? And so, which one do you have? It's not like people just run out and I got to go get a coffee enema, for example. I got to kill all the parasites. Well, how do we even know that parasites are what is affecting you?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great questions. I think when we talk about how do you diagnose what is the cause of symptoms, which is essentially what we're asking and what our patients are asking us all the time, right, is you have to know what could go wrong first, right? And so when you know what can go wrong, then you start to tease out even some of those overlapping symptoms in order to figure out, okay, based on the symptoms that you're having, based on the things that we can rule out using diagnostic testing, can we get to some likely possibilities that are underneath, and we can get some treatment plans that, again, are very reasonable for you to do, and that can be, enacted in a way that isn't going to be harmful, but at the same time can have a fast improvement on your overall health.
Yeah, exactly. I know in our office, we do offer advanced testing that can help break down and give answers for a lot of these things. There are stool tests out there that can tell you, hey, is this, your microbiome? Is this, mycotoxins, which we haven't even touched on? Or, is this parasites? What exactly is causing your symptoms? Obviously, once we have an idea on what might be causing your symptoms, well, then we can point you in the right direction as to treat that and get you feeling back to normal.
And just to touch on something you said, because I think that's a great, kind of buzzword that I want the audience to be able to appreciate and understand, mycotoxins, right? We talked about what can go wrong. So, mycotoxins is going to fall into the category of, really mold and exposure, right? But a mycotoxin isn't mold itself. Mold is one of those, things that, it's almost as ubiquitous as the parasites and bacteria that we're talking about. The downside is that mold will produce then mycotoxins. So the toxin itself is the mycotoxin, fungal toxin. And therefore, when we see that, when that's detected in the body, we'll do testing in order to pick that up in the clinic, right? So when we see that, that's not a false positive, right? You should not have mycotoxins being cleared by the body. Now, your organs are actively doing that, whether it's your liver, your kidneys, any of these natural filters that are metabolizing whatever byproducts they need to, eliminate and excrete in order to, get these mycotoxins out of your system. But those are the things that can go wrong. And we have the diagnostic testing that can help us match up symptoms, right, with these positive findings we're seeing on this test in order to find out who might benefit, again, from therapy and treatment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now that we're on this subject, I want to go and let's take a deep dive into, again, SIBO versus parasites versus leaky gut. What might these patients have? Obviously, we know the typical symptoms: bloating, constipation, loose stools. Sometimes with parasites, we'll hear about people grinding their teeth. Myalgias, which is muscle aches and pains, and then of course the big one, which is a very vague symptom. Obviously, it covers a lot of things, which is fatigue, right? And we see that all the time as well, chronic fatigue. But I wanted to touch into these so people can understand, what is SIBO? What is leaky gut? From there, which one might they have?
Now, I'll start with leaky gut. Okay,
Sure.
so If you have a leaky gut, leaky, they're talking about a fancy word called permeability, right? What that means is the cells in our gut are, like any cells in our body, they're stuck together and they're forming a nice cohesive wall, right? Unfortunately, with inflammation, right, that barrier starts to get broken up a little bit, right? And you create some space, some theoretical space begins to form that can unfortunately allow things to pass through that weren't intended to pass through. So if someone who has a leaky gut, they're suffering from inflammation, that wall becomes a little more permeable, it starts to open up a little more, and as a result, things that you'd be protected from otherwise, toxins that we talked about earlier, byproducts that are harmful, right, that we don't want to be absorbing. Those types of things can enter the body, and then vice versa, you can leak out valuable nutrients that you're trying to hold on to, right?
Yeah.
Or what ends up happening is we call it malabsorption, right, which means poor absorption. The vitamins, the nutrients, the things that your body depends on for good growth, for good health. Unfortunately, those things that we're trying to hold on to, we don't get to hold on to it because it's leaky. And as a result, you're not absorbing it either fast enough or you're not absorbing it efficiently enough in order to keep it on this side of the wall. And so those things will just get passed out in your stool, unfortunately.
Definitely. And I've heard that too. In school, we got told about tight junctions. Right now, let's break that down. All that is
Exactly.
it should be tight. There should not be anything leaking out. Well, what happens is, like you'd mentioned, with, again, lifestyle choices, we develop inflammation. These toxins leak out, gets into our bloodstream, the body, and your immune system sees that. It goes, this is not supposed to be in the bloodstream. Let's fix this problem. Well, in turn, our immune system actually causes more damage.
Right.
Inflammation ensues, and then here we are, like I said, back at the GI doctor.
Exactly. And what we know about the gut too is that different areas of the gut are responsible for the absorption of certain types of nutrients, right? Which is why we know that pernicious anemia happens in the small intestine, because we know the jejunum, or a specific portion of the small intestine, is responsible primarily for, right, the reabsorption of certain nutrients. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that your entire gut is leaky. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can just be one specific area that may be inflamed. And we see this in some of our inflammatory bowel disease patients, right? We know where you're going to be inflamed in Crohn's. We know that there's multiple, different areas. We know that in ulcerative colitis, it's going to be primarily the rectum can be affected, or the distal colon. But you can also have other areas that are inflamed as well. And as a result of that, we can kind of see it matches well with, what you're going to be absorbing little of, right? And then, of course, patients can't help this. This is post-operative, but short gut patients, right? Patients who have had to have intestines removed because of disease or obstructions or whatever pathological process, required surgery. And then which portion of gut was removed can then affect their symptoms as well. So the gut, I say this to say that the gut is a beautiful map. It's this beautiful map on the body that now we know how important it is. It affects the brain, the mood, it affects your stressors, how you're feeling, your overall health. And we can see that, and you can map it out now, and our gut health analysis helps us to make sure that you do have a healthy gut.
Right. Well, now here's my next question. So again, so we've hit leaky gut. Well, how do we know it's not SIBO versus leaky gut? Again, so I know SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Leaky gut, now we know, is the actual intestinal lining is allowing some toxins to come out. Well, if I'm just a regular patient, how am I going to know? I mean, obviously, I'm having the same symptoms. Again, I'm bloated, I'm constipated, I've got loose stool, undergone multiple colonoscopies. Well, which one is it, right? And so I want to touch now on, SIBO. So let's take a little bit of a dive into that, and then we'll go into parasites, which again is very similar. And then from there, we can talk about how we figure out which one it is, and then what to do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell the audience a little bit about SIBO. So we know it's small intestine bacterial overgrowth.
Right.
What does that mean? Is there supposed to be bacteria in your intestine? Is there supposed to be bacteria in your gut?
Right. So what everyone should know is that bacteria in our gut is okay, right? Again, this is your gut biome. That's
normal.
what that
You
is.
have to have bacteria.
Exactly. We need bacteria.
It'd be harmful not to have bacteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need our bacteria to break down nutrients. That's what they're used for. Now, that being said, just like anything, moderation, right? If you have too much of something, that can cause problems.
The right quantity and the right type.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so what can cause SIBO? Let's start with that, right? So we know excessive alcohol intake. We know too many, good things, right? So again, processed foods, the fun stuff, right? So we realize that, again, lifestyle plays a big role in this. I know viral issues as well can kind of, mess with our gut biome and cause an overgrowth. But what do we do about it? That's the big question. So again, we got to get our gut biome back to a good state. And so that's done through, certain pre, pro, postbiotics. Can we touch on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talk about achieving, really the word we're looking for is homeostasis, right? Just a good, level where we're optimizing our health, where our gut is in balance, right? You talked about everyone's gonna have a different fingerprint, okay? We're gonna have different types, but we know, especially in our analysis too, that some bacteria can be more harmful than others. We want certainly a lot less. We want more of the good bacteria, right? So that we have an overall good balance, because these bacteria are always working. They're always eating something. They're always, they're a living organism just like we are, and we depend on each other, right? And then so when you talk about those things, prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, right? Prebiotic is what comes before the bacteria. Well, we talked about we want that forward-flowing river, right? So prebiotic is like your fiber, right? Your large molecules that are help pulling things, that are going to move things along, that can help take sugars and other things that are harmful to us otherwise, right? I mean, we know that sugar's everywhere, and you do a great job of educating patients, I feel like this, on a daily basis, but refined processed carbs, right? High amounts of additives and sugars, right? They're going to cause inflammation. They're problematic. Fibers and things like that can actually reduce overall, essentially, real sugar content, right? Because it can again absorb, basically hold on to these types of things that we want to eliminate, help them move forward in our gut, and therefore get eliminated. Okay, and then probiotics themselves, supporting biosis. So a probiotic might be like yogurt, for instance, right? And so something that has live cultures in it, that's going to have some of these good bacteria that we know we want more of. Probiotic is going to be making sure that you get the right bacteria into your gut and promote that bacteria over maybe more harmful bacteria, or bacteria that you in particular don't need or want, right? And then postbiotic is exactly what we were talking about earlier, where these bacteria are alive and they're producing things just like you and I are, right? We talk about what we excrete in our elimination byproducts. Well, the same thing for bacteria, right? They're having excretion of byproducts that some of them are very beneficial, right? Sometimes these short-chain fatty acids that bacteria will break down other things and release, we rely on that. That reduces inflammation in the intestine and in the gut. And so a lot of these byproducts can be extremely helpful. Some things that we don't digest well, that bacteria do digest well, then their byproducts can be absorbed by our gut. Whereas if no bacteria had touched it, right, you wouldn't be able to absorb it. You would either absorb it at a poor rate or a poor efficiency, to the point where you're not getting the nutrients that you need. And so, you touched on what can we do about it? Well, you can get on a good regimen of pre, pro, and postbiotics, like the digestive enzyme supports.
Absolutely. And that includes fermented foods as well. Sauerkraut, not everyone's favorite, but guess what?
Yeah.
When in a stressful time, sometimes we got to resort to those kind of foods.
And fermented foods is a great example.
Yeah.
Right? And fermentation, right, is again just a product, is just a form of energy creation, right, that we know bacteria do, right, or yeast or any sort of fungus can do as well.
Yep.
And so this sort of energy creation, we know if it's happening, then there's live, there's live cells. And so these live cultures, that's why those fermented foods are so great for us.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the third and one of the bigger topics going around right now, parasites, right? Again, we touched on how these all have very similar symptoms. Parasites do mix in a few other weird symptoms. Again, grinding teeth, we've heard. Sometimes people can have some anal or vaginal itchiness or irritation, mainly with pinworms. But, I heard you mention something, a couple days ago that was very interesting, and I wanted to share that with everyone, is that not all parasites are bad, right? Now, hold it against me here, but I wanted to touch into that, and hopefully you can, shed some light on some people here.
Exactly. So, in biology, just like not all bacteria is bad, you can't put blanket statements on everything. And that's why we don't just see patients and throw them on antibiotics, right? And you have to discriminate properly. And I think that's the goal of a health clinic, is to help patients to optimize their health individually, right? And so same thing with parasites. Believe it or not, there's been fantastic evidence in the allergy and immunology world that show that there were studies that studied patients or young children that played in the dirt, right? And as a result, were exposed to many common parasites that live in the earth, right? Live in dirt, get exposed to your fingernails, your toes, etc. those patients then went on, compared to a more affluent group that lived in a more sterile environment, they went on to have less allergies, right? And the reason was because these parasites are hiding in your body at all times. Now, many people will go their entire life not realizing they have, again, this is undetectable amounts of small amounts of parasites, right, that may not even show up on a test, okay? But these parasites will live, and you'll go your entire life and die without ever realizing you had these parasites. And the way they hide from your immune system is that they release these low levels of cytokines or cell signals, these anti-inflammatory molecules into the bloodstream. And as a result, your immune system is just a little bit inhibited, right? And as a result, this low-level immune modulation occurs that hides the parasite, but at the same time, reduces your allergy symptoms. Because remember, your allergy symptoms are your immune system responding to some sort of antigen or exposure. Right?
I know us here in Texas appreciate that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Cedar, right? Sometimes I wish I had more parasites to walk cedar.
Exactly. But there are some bad ones out there, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so when parasites become a problem, like anything, then it warrants treatment, right? And so we detect that by looking at excretion of what types of mycotoxins are present in the body, right?
Right.
Or obviously, if there's a growth of worms, you talk about pinworms. This is a classic example. You can see roundworms, things that we'll detect, and we'll treat those appropriately with antifungals. Or if the case, we can go on a parasite detox or cleanse for the gut as well, which can be beneficial.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, with most parasite cleanses, obviously there's a slew of different options out there, but one of the most common we see is basically 2 forms of cloves with some black walnut hull. That's basically the outermost area of the black walnut fruit. These things can kind of paralyze the parasite. Your body will then kind of naturally dispose of them. But
non-harmful, not going to hurt you.
Exactly right. Now the big question out there is, and I know we hear about this from a lot of our patients, from other countries and things like that. And if you look into it, a lot of these other countries will recommend a parasite cleanse like once a year, because again, it's naive to think that we live in a cleaner area. We don't have parasites. It's we got to realize we're exposed to our pets. We're going outside. If you have children, obviously they're out, like you mentioned, playing in the dirt, having a good time. They bring that in with them, so it's very easy to encounter these things. My question is, how often should we treat this, or should we just prophylactically or just preventatively do a cleanse once a year, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the tropics, right? It's not tropical medicine, so the burden of parasites may not be as large, right? But again, parasites are ubiquitous, meaning present everywhere, right? And so as a result, I believe the answer is individualized to the patient. I think that we have to discriminate when to treat and when not to treat.
So if you're symptomatic, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Got you.
Symptomatic, if we're going down the constellation of symptoms that may suggest, right, that the gut is the cause of the problem, we've ruled out other things that are more common, and we're getting towards parasites as a potential option for you. Again, those are the patients that we're going to start considering our differential being broadened for, and potentially include parasites as a cause of their symptoms, right?
Now,
just not indiscriminately treat everyone. Right?
Sure, and here's my question, to piggyback that. How do we know if our symptoms are parasite? Is there testing out there? I mean, or are we just throwing dartboards, or just throwing darts at nothing here?
I think the bigger answer is probably, the complicated answer is probably yes and no.
Okay.
Right? There's certainly tests that can suggest parasites. There's some tests that will specifically pick up individual parasites, in which case the answer is yes. And then again, there's many patients that they'll have such low level amounts of parasites that are still having an impact on their immune system, which we talked about the gut and how that influences multiple systems in the body that may not be detected easily with a test. Right?
Gotcha.
And so may have low levels that don't get detected. And so the answer is not always so simple.
Okay. From here, I want to kind of segue into now. We have these 3 main gut issues, again being SIBO, leaky gut, and now the parasites. Well, what do we do about this stuff? Again, It's like, it's great to know, okay, I've got leaky gut. Well, I'm stuck, right? I've got a stressful job, for example. So I'm always under stress, so my gut's messed up, or I don't want to give up my cocktail hour on Wednesdays. Well, what do we do about this? How are we going to help these people out? Basically, how do we get the gut biome back in check so that people can start feeling, back to their old selves again?
Well, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier too, right? I think that you have to optimize the environment. That's really what health is, right? It's optimizing the environment to give your gut the best opportunity to thrive. Just like we optimize the body in the clinic in order to give the patient the best opportunity to optimize their health and thrive. And so, a lot of it comes down to what you feed the gut as well. And so, this is a big topic of yours. What are things that we should avoid in the diet in order to try to optimize gut health?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we hear these, I don't want to call them fad diets because they're going around. But and the big thing is like now we're, the food industry has been exposed, and I think that has really steered people towards these extreme diets, let me call them that. For example, carnivore diet, right? I'm not going to ever eat a vegetable again. I'm not touching any grains. I'm just going to strictly eat meat. Well, again, we know that with prebiotics, which is what our gut biome needs in order to optimally operate, we need fermented foods or we need fiber. Well, I got news for you. If you're eating steak every night or every day, you're not getting any fiber there, right?
And so that's one of the potential drawbacks of that diet.
Exactly right.
Yeah, there are many strengths too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then of course we have the alternative, which is these people that are just willy-nilly. I'm going to eat a donut every morning, and then I'm going to eat, for example, McDonald's at lunch, and then for dinner I'm going to go out to eat again. So highly, highly processed foods. Well, that's also going to affect your gut in a negative way. So to piggyback with what you're saying, I definitely recommend, again, moderation. And that's what I stress in the clinic is avoid the grains the best you can. We know that the grains were altered about 100 years ago, a long time ago, to basically for monetary purposes. Obviously, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we saw white processed flour become very easy to mass produce, and as it was rolled out, the shelf life lasted longer. So obviously, people who didn't have as much money could buy a loaf of bread, and it would last 3 weeks a month, versus the old school way where it lasts 2, 3, 4 days, right? They didn't have refrigeration back then. So storing stuff wasn't as easy. And so I definitely think that we have to really focus in, like you said, on focusing on the good gut biome. And how do we do that, right? A good pre, pro, and postbiotic if you are symptomatic. Finding a doctor that listens to you, right? If your PCP keeps punting you to the GI specialist and you've already gone 2 or 3 colonoscopies and everything's normal, well, I hate to say this, but it's true. The GI doctor is going to say, hey, what do you want me to do for you?
Isn't that the definition of insanity?
It is. Right? It is. Repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Exactly. But I got news for you. The GI doctor is going to look and he's going to say, hey, I don't know what more I can do for you here. This must not be a gut issue. Well, if that's the case, you really need to ask about advanced gut testing. And if your doctor's not, able to help you out with that, you might want to look, to a functional specialist who can offer that to you, so you can at least get to the root of why you're having those symptoms, and then obviously once then you can focus on how to prevent them and how to treat them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aside from that too, I know that there's some parasite treatments, there's some leaky gut treatments, there's some SIBO treatments. I think we've touched pretty good onto that stuff.
Yeah, detox protocols.
Yeah,
I think another way that you can optimize gut health. You talked about what to avoid. Well, let's talk about what to eat more of.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You want to make sure that you have good high fiber diets, right? You talked about the fermented foods, things that you'll hear this in Good Energy too. They have a lot of different diets, and some of the things are maybe within your world of palatable foods that you can tolerate, and sometimes they're not, right? And so you're going to find out what's going to work for you too. But at the same time, you can talk about if you have, again, a bacterial overgrowth, if you have parasites that are contributing to dysbiosis of the gut, well, then you need to get on a detox protocol as fast as possible, right? To try to straighten things out.
As well as a low inflammatory diet, right?
Yes.
I know we've got phenols or polyphenols we've heard of, and what is that, right? Basically, we're looking at coffee, we're looking at blueberries and blackberries, we're looking at cinnamon, for example. These are all anti-inflammatories. They're going to reduce the inflammation in your gut. And then obviously we add in new gut biome, and hopefully we can replace the bad stuff and get us back to homeostasis, like you mentioned earlier.
And we talk about getting on probiotics. Well, we know, or at least I know, that yogurts, right? People talk about some yogurts can be a probiotic. They may have live cultures in it.
Yeah.
How do I know what to choose? And are there ones that I should avoid, or how do I discriminate
Absolutely.
between a good product and a not as good product?
Exactly. So, I think people love convenience and they love flavors, right? I mean, who doesn't love, the crazy flavors out there that, shouldn't be coming from obviously a yogurt brand, right? And so I know there's a big brand right now, Chobani's, under a lot of fire. They've found a lot of essentially, like microplastics within their brand. They've done a lot of outside third-party testing and found this stuff. And a lot of these things can be, again, inflammatory to our gut versus what we're looking to get out of a good, yogurt, for example. So I always recommend
And
plain.
does that come in the additives?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the time. And I always do recommend a non-flavored, so plain Greek yogurt. Read the ingredients. I cannot stress the importance of that. If there's 50 things in there, I got news for you. It doesn't take 50 things to make a yogurt, right?
Right.
So be cognizant of that. If you can't pronounce it half the time, it's not good, okay? If you can't make it yourself, it's not good.
Yeah.
If you need some extra flavor, if you're one of those people that just absolutely hates the taste of plain Greek yogurt, add in some honey, right? I mean, you can go to your local farmer's market. We can get some agave nectar. That also will sweeten it up a little. I like to add in some clean protein. I'll whip that in. Make sure, again, with the protein powder as well. If it tastes like Nutter Butters, I got news for you. It's not good for you.
Yeah.
Keep the simple stuff, right? We know vanilla and we know chocolate are very simple, and most of these things only have about 5 ingredients. That's what they should have.
And I think I want to highlight what you said there too. Reading the ingredients is so important, and you don't have to be a biochemist to read the ingredients for what is maltodextrate and polysaccharide, right? You don't need to know all this stuff. I think you listed some really easy kind of fundamental low-hanging fruit that the average consumer, the average patient can easily fall in line with, right?
Right.
5 ingredients or less.
Right.
Very easy thing. If you're
Monk
gonna put
fruit,
more,
right?
if you're gonna put more than 5 ingredients in it, there's probably too many additives that may be causing problems.
Absolutely.
Right? And then look at the ingredient list for added sugars, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's a big hidden thing, right? I'm a big fan of brands that do not add sugar. There's already enough sugar in this world. There's plenty of sugar.
Right.
It's causing problems everywhere.
Right.
We just celebrated the sugar holiday of the year, right? And so you're going to get plenty of sugar in your normal lifetime. Don't get it added, especially in foods that you don't need, right? What is with the adding sugar into marinara sauce? People got to add additional sugar.
Well, we know it's addictive, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And where did that start, right?
Right. And some of this stuff is so crazily conspiratorial that you'd think that, it's only being talked about in like people with tinfoil hats on. This is the truth. This is
It is.
I mean, you know all about the tobacco industry
We
and
do.
how they influenced the makeup of many different brands, right?
Absolutely, yeah. In the 80s, basically sales for cigarettes and tobacco products was dipping. Obviously, we'd already had, from the 50s, these major tobacco companies, and they wanted to diversify their portfolio, obviously, like any big business likes to do. And so they found their way, believe it or not, into the food space, which is pretty interesting.
Unreal.
Unreal. It's pretty sad. And so when they did that, they used their marketing for tobacco, which is obviously addiction, and they altered many foods basically to do the same thing, right? To get you addicted to these foods.
It's genius if you're trying to make a buck.
It is.
Right?
It's evil genius is what I
is,
call it, right?
exactly.
And so we saw that with those products that were owned by Big Tobacco. They had about 80% more sugar, carbohydrates, as well as sodium, right? Many addictive things. And so, and honestly, a lot of this stuff has fallen out of their hands, but the food industry that has bought back these companies, for example, has not gone back and changed the ingredients because it works.
The lesson was learned, yeah.
Well, sales are
unfortunately.
high, right?
Exactly.
And so definitely avoiding these. And again, we find these mainly with the processed and ultra processed foods. I literally, when I talk to patients, I compare these things to drug dealing, right? Which is crazy. But you're taking something pure, let's call it wheat, for example. We're then cutting it with something synthetic. We're then cutting it again. So by the time you're eating this thing, 2/3 of it isn't even real food. That's why we've all been digging in our couch at some point and found a goldfish from 5 years ago, and it looks the exact same. It's
Exactly.
like, don't eat that stuff.
That cheeseburger that's 20 years old that survived the nuclear fallout.
The McDonald's French fry right under the car seat. Yeah, let's not eat that stuff. That's not good for us, right? Let's instead focus in on the foods, again, high in fiber, non-processed, that are good for us.
So one thing you said, which you're absolutely right? I mean, not even a joke. You said, I treat it like a drug. it's a drug. We want our patients to see this as, you know, a drug is something that has a biological or a bio or chemical impact on you, right?
Right.
That will influence things down the line in your body. That's what this is. We want patients to see holistically their health, from the quality of the air you breathe to the quality or timing of the sunlight that you put in your face, to the chemicals that touch your skin, to the exposure of what foods you put in your body, right? These are all going to have an impact on your health through, again, a lot of the mechanisms we've already discussed. But they need to start seeing it as that. You know, if you don't, there's so many patients will come in and say, "Oh, I don't want to take medicines. I don't want to do this and that." But you know, I'll eat a Kit Kat 3 times a day. Listen, man, like that's a drug, right? And you're taking it on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So get used to the idea that everything that's touching you like this is gonna have an influence on you. And you know, I love that you speak it so candidly like that.
Well, it's so true. I mean, we see this all the time, right? Oh, I don't drink alcohol, but yet I go to the buffet or the you know, all you can eat, and I eat everything inside. And that makes it okay, right? I'm better than the person that drinks alcohol, because
Like
I go and
the supersized meal,
pick
but
your
you order
drug.
the Diet Coke on the side.
pick your drug, right? It's the same kind of thing, yeah. And again, it all comes down to moderation, right? I mean, and like you mentioned, realizing that our body is a vessel. I tell patients all the time, our bodies are like cars, right? We've all seen the classic, you know, for example, 55 Chevy driving down the road that's beautiful, and you're like, man, that car's been well taken care of. And then, of course, you see the one that's riding down the road and it's covered in rust, and you know, the tires are all different colors and it's all beat up. Well, that's the same thing as our bodies. And I hear this all the time. People come in, they go, for example, I've never had high blood pressure. And I go, well, again, it's like all of a sudden you're driving your car and the check engine light comes on. That's a response from your body saying, hey man, what we're doing is not working, right? Acid reflux is the same thing. People think, oh, my dad had acid reflux, so I got acid reflux. It's hereditary.
Right.
Well, that's not necessarily the case, right? That is your body saying, hey, what we're putting in me right now is not good. And so
maybe they didn't inherit the genes. Maybe they inherited the environment.
that's right, exactly. And it's time to listen, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, so I think these are all great subjects. I think that, again, just to recap, we definitely need to focus on, you know, creating that homeostasis, which is a good symbiotic relationship.
Balance.
Exactly, right. And moderation. And people need to realize, this isn't us saying you can never go out to dinner again, you can never have a cupcake again, you can never, you know, have a cocktail again. It's okay.
And listen, I love Chobani too, so I don't want people to think.
I'm sure you were
I don't want the Chobani lovers to be, you know, dropping comments all over.
you
this
know
thing.
they will be.
I've already got the 24 pack at home. I love Chobani, but you know, you need to be aware of these things.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and being cognizant of it, knowing, you know, hey, I was good Monday to Friday. I worked out 4 days this week. I had a very healthy diet. I stayed away from fast foods. But Friday night's my date night. I want to take the wife and the kids out, you know, or we were at baseball all day Saturday, or ballet, and we're tired. But we know, because we were good during the week, we're allowed to go out to dinner and spend time with your family. Or you know, we got Thanksgiving come up. It's the same kind of thing, right?
Absolutely.
But let's not let that carry on for 3 weeks, right? Oh, we've got leftovers, so that means I get to eat pie every day for 3 weeks, because God forbid it go to waste, right?
Yep,
So,
exactly. And that's the beauty of having a good relationship with, again, a practitioner, right?
Right.
They're not here to just have this one-size-fits-all, throw it on your model, you got to live like this. You know, it's about optimizing health for the individual, finding out what values they have, finding out what promotes good health in their life, right? Because, again, hey, listen, the Italians know this better than anyone. Sitting down for a good meal with family, right, the things that you enjoy, that's going to promote longevity as well. There's some definite and certain health benefits to doing those types of things. And so, you know, you're not saying that everyone has to do this one-size-fits-all model. You know, get a good practitioner that, again, can follow along with you, whether it's us or somebody else. Just make sure you have a good relationship with someone that acts as a consultant on your behalf.
And I love that you're saying this. I love that you're saying this, because our clinicians out there that are hearing this as well realize not all patients are the same, right? Some people have more stressful jobs.
Yeah.
Think about it. You know, people that come in that are mad, you know, already, or they're high strung, realize they might have been punted around from doctor to doctor. You know, sometimes just listening to people, they will tell you what's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, realize that, hey, it's not as simple as, hey, you need to quit your job. If stress is what's causing your problems, just quit, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, they might have a family at home that they need to take care of. It's working around each person's individual circumstances and helping figure out how we can help them. And I think that that's been lost, unfortunately.
We're consultants, right? Not everybody has the same health goals.
Right.
somebody's definition of good health might be six-pack abs and being able to bench press 300 pounds, right?
Right.
That might be off the radar of another patient, right? And,
Right.
and their idea of good health might be optimized blood work, longevity, right?
Or I don't want to be on all these pills. How do we cut them in half,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's meeting the patient where they are, and I think you do a fantastic job of that, if I may say so myself. I think that's really the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once again, this was Blueprint Wellness, sponsored by Blue Agave Functional Medicine, Troy Green, Dr. Scott Knepper. Thank you for listening. Hey guys, so you heard us talking earlier about pre, pro, and post biotics. This is a brand that we really like. We sell it online as a website as well. It's ActivateRX. This is a good mix of digestive enzymes to help you break down the foods you're eating, as well as contains a good mix of pre, pro, and post biotics.
We also offer our intestinal cleanse, which we like to use for parasites, just removing those parasites. Again, it contains black walnut hull as well as a couple cloves. So if you're interested, click the link below to shop for them now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blueprint Wellness Podcast presented by Blue Agave Functional Medicine. Please note, the information discussed in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor should it be considered a substitute for professional medical guidance. Always consult your physician or qualified healthcare provider before making any decisions regarding your health or treatment plan. We appreciate you joining us today. Until next time, take care and be well.